أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings upon all of our respected viewers. Wherever you may be watching, welcome once again to Ahlulbayt TV. This is the Ahlulbayt live Muharram special. We will be here inshallah up until the 9th and possibly even the 10th of the holy month of Muharram. Of course, this is a pertinent time of year for the followers of the Ahlul Bayt and of course Muslims in general because of the martyrdom and the tragedy which befell Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Those of you who are regular viewers to this particular channel will know that this time every year we look at the event that took place in the year 60 AH and seek to learn lessons from that particular time and try to implement those lessons into our life. And it is my pleasure, alhamdulillah, to welcome to the studio today somebody who's not a stranger to you. Our respected guest is Ghulam Abbas Laka, who has alhamdulillah agreed to join us once again, and we'll be discussing today the link or the lessons that we can learn which would enable us to become closer to the Imam of our time. May Allah hasten his reappearance, and to of course link how we can do so from the events of Karbala inshallah. We will be here every day, as I mentioned, between 2 and 3 p.m. and this particular topic that our guest will be discussing today is a series, so he will inshallah be here in the future to continue this. So make sure you of course tune in every day to catch him in the future inshallah, and of course help us spread the word to those who maybe are unaware. Let me not waste any of our guests' time and start off by welcoming him to the studio on your behalf, with your permission of course. Ghulam Abbas Laka, it is a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Assalamu
alaikum. Salam wa rahmatullah. So as I mentioned, you are going to help us understand how we can use the event of Karbala to strengthen our relationship and inshallah our allegiance to the 12th Imam alayhi salam.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. All praises to Allah, the Creator of the universes and their Sustainer, the Provider of believers and non-believers. And may His choicest blessings be on the seal of His prophets, the last of His messengers and His holy progeny. And in particular, may His incessant blessings ever continue on that beloved grandson of the Holy Prophet, on Abd Al-Rauf Shokoya salawatullahi alayhi. If we are to, inshallah, begin to even attempt to drink at the fountain of lessons that Karbala represents, the first drink has to be what is imamah and what is our relationship to the Imam of our time, and how through reflecting upon the tragedy of Karbala we may renew our allegiance to the Imam of our time, and how we may be able to benefit from him. The Imam is there to help us. And as the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, and his holy progeny is very widely reported to have said, for instance to the famous companion Jabir, that he will be a light to the people like the sun is behind the clouds. And this is really the completion of the mission of Karbala. This is why, of course, in Dua Nutbah that is attributed to the 12th Imam alayhi salam, he refers to himself by the phrase, Aina talibu bidamil maqtul bil Karbala. Where is the one who will avenge the blood of the martyrs of Karbala? But when we look at this idea of avenging the blood of the martyrs of Karbala, this has got deep metaphorical principles. The real sacrifice that was made by Imam Hussein al-Islam was a spiritual one for the reform of the community, beginning with the reform of oneself. And this is why, inshallah, it would be of interest to look at how the entire mission of Karbala relates to the concept of imamah and affects us in our daily lives with our daily renewal with the Imam of our time. in London in 2014, in whichever part of the world we may be today, the lessons of Karbala can serve as a guide. Now, how do we do that? Because when you are sitting in front of an ocean of knowledge, we have to begin one sip at a time.
Sure.
So it potentially may be useful to structure our analysis by looking at lessons from the period before Karbala, on the journey to Karbala, and thirdly in Karbala itself. And of course, during the Ashra Zainabiyya, we reflect upon the lessons post-Karbala.
Sure.
Because of course, let us never be told that Islam is a sexist religion, because Imam Hussain alayhi salam went with his ambassador, Bibi Zainab alayhi salam. For had it not been for her, Karbala would have remained in Karbala.
Sure.
We would not have had these lessons today. So if we begin at the beginning with the first martyr of the tragedy of Karbala, we begin with Hazrat Muslim bin Aqil. And I think the lessons around his sacrifice are incredibly important for us today. But before we go into the details, we cannot forget that we live in a context where people are brutally and mercilessly murdered just for doing nothing other than commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussain alayhi salam and his companions. And when we look at the broader context, we are meeting in London, and it's important to consider the teachings of the wider community that we're in. Well, one of the famous Christian theologians, and indeed philosophers, Soren Kierkegaard of the 19th century, has said something very important that we can use as a bridge between us and the people around us. He said that when a tyrant dies, his rule ends. People get relief from his tyranny. But when a martyr dies, his rule begins. And we therefore, when we come at the beginning of Muharram to sit in a gathering, to participate in any form of remembrance, we are entering the kingdom of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Not because he needs us to. He's already got the fountain of Kawthar. But because we need to.
Sure.
We are the ones with the thirst that needs to be quenched. But it is a shame if the glass of water has been brought to us, but we do not quench our thirst. Indeed, it is an even greater shame if we seek to murder those who are quenching their thirst at this great fountain. It is a particular travesty when people do this in the name of the Quran. So I think we've got to, at the outset, clear up any misunderstanding, so that those people who may be inclined into thinking that this whole process of commemorating is in any way an innovation, a bid'ah, should realize that this accusation is itself a bid'ah, because the Holy Quran is replete with very clear messages. In the interest of time, I'd like to look at only two.
Sure.
Two that we are, alhamdulillah, very familiar with. And there is an importance at looking at what we're familiar with, because we need to reinvigorate our connection with these verses. Firstly, Surah Ali Imran, chapter 3, verse 169. And the two that I've chosen are very powerful verses, because both of them begin by saying, and reckon not those who have been killed in the way of Allah. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتْلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ. Do not regard those who have passed away in the way of Allah as being dead. بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ. Rather, they are alive in the رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. That they receive their spiritual sustenance through their Lord. So straight away, we're not, grave worshipping as we are wrongly accused. We are commemorating the spiritual magnanimity of those who have sacrificed everything. This great shrine we have displayed behind us is an expression of the love of those who have come to recognize the beauty of the sacrifice of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And how do we view this sacrifice as being beauty? Because his ambassador told us it's beautiful. Because in the court of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, the accursed, when the family of Imam Hussain was taken to the court, and Ubaydullah sought to try to humiliate Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, forgetting that she is the daughter of the one who had the peak of eloquence, the Nahjul Balagha. And when he sought to taunt Bibi Zainab alayhi salam as to what apparently he said God had done to her family, and he said, what did you see? What did you make of it? Of course, her words are etched in gold. Her words are being, Ma ra'aytu, I did not see anything, illa jamila, except the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we look at Karbala through the lens of Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, what do we see?
Sure.
So this is the first verse that we see. The second verse is from an earlier surah, Baqarah Surah 2, verse 152. This is a very sharp warning to anyone who fails to understand the importance of sainthood in Islam. For it says, وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا. And do not say about those who have been killed in the way of Allah that they are dead. أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ. Again the same words. Rather they are alive. But now the ending of this verse is very sharp. It says, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ. But you do not perceive it. So the failure that we have here in the world today is not a failure of faith. Alhamdulillah, we have faith. The failure is of perceiving where the right faith is. And the failure of following those people who encourage death and murder in the name of a religion for which Imam Hussein ﷺ sacrificed to show the beauty, the peace and the love. Such was the compassion of Imam Hussein ﷺ that when we look at what famous historians across the Islamic tradition, such as Abu Mikhnaf, such as Tabari, such as Khawarizmi, when they recount what Imam Hussein ﷺ was whispering in the final moments as he was being martyred, they all narrate the beauty of his du'as and how he was praying for the community in his final moments. This was a man of the greatest compassion, sacrificing everything in the way of compassion. But he was part of a mission, and that mission had 12 elements that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his holy progeny, guided the people that would come thereafter. So the third being Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But the completion of their journey is the Mahdi, the one who will rise.
Sure.
So we are failing in our duty to really appreciate the mission of Karbala if we fail to equate it with the mission and the work of the Imam of our time.
Sure.
And inshallah I'd like to look at some of these connections as time permits.
I think I thank you for that introduction, because of course I think it's important for those who are carrying out the killing, but also it's important for us to, if you like, solidify our resolve in what we are doing in the remembrance and understanding. But as you said, you want to move on, and I'm quite interested how we can make that link, because normally when we talk about Muharram or we talk about Karbala, we think about Imam Hussein. Yes. We don't think about the Holy Prophet, peace and blessed be upon him, his holy progeny, or Imam Hassan, or any of the other Imams. This is, if you like, a time period where our contemplation is dedicated to the third Imam. So tell me how we can, if you like, relate this very important, pivotal event in Islamic history to the 12th Imam.
Well, I think the best way to do that is by looking at the words of the Imam himself, because this is what he himself said his whole mission was about. And I'd like to do it in three ways, inshallah. Firstly, to look at the letter that he wrote to the people of Basra, because in his letter to the people of Basra he sets this out very clearly. The idea of Nubuwah, the idea of Imamah, and how the Ahlulbayt Islam have related to different periods of history in different ways.
Sure.
Secondly, the mission of Hazrat Muslim alayhi salam. And thirdly, the communication between Hazrat Muslim alayhi salam and the Imam. Now, to conclude the previous point, remaining with the Holy Quran, we must never forget that this idea of the Mahdi is in the Holy Quran. And so if we're to understand Karbala and the principles of Imamah that Imam Hussein stipulates, both in his letter to the people of Kufa and his letter to the people of Basra, we remember that in Surah Ban Israel, Surah 17, Ayah 71, the Quran warns us, and this is again a lesson to those who seek to focus on the Holy Quran but don't see the wisdom of it, and indeed seek to create strife and division through it. The Quran should be a unifying force, especially when it comes to the Imam of our time. For this verse says, be mindful of the day when we will raise people with their Imam. يَوْمَ نَدُ كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. So if we don't have an Imam of our time, then where is the validity of this verse? It is fundamentally important that we recognize that the validity of the Quran, it goes hand in hand with the Ahlulbayt alayhim salam. This is why we have the teaching of the Holy Prophet that he leaves behind two weighty things, the thaqalain, the Quran and the Ahlulbayt, who will be together until they reach him at Kawthar. So if we only focus on one without the other, we should know that we're not on the path of the Holy Prophet. We're on some other path. Secondly, when we turn to the examples of how to relate to the Imam of our time, one of the things we learn is loyalty and tawakkul and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is where the lesson of Hazrat Muslim is very important. Because Abu Mikhnaf relates, one of the famous historians, indeed his father was one of the companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam. So we're looking at one of the earliest sources in Islamic history. And in particular his Maqtal of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, which is part of the Maqatil genre of Islamic history. The historiography of Islam is quite interesting because the Arabic tradition created different genres of history. There was the Maqatil tradition, there was the Tabaqat tradition, which is biographical dictionaries, which was not known in the West. When the Orientalists began to look at Arabic tradition, they discovered this biographical history, the Tabaqat literature, which was new to them. So we've got that source, and then we've got the broad historical accounts from, for example, people accepted by all Muslims, like Tabari, from the Sunni tradition. Sure. We've got a number of, Ibn Asakir's Tarikh talks a lot about this as well. Now, one of them, Abu Mikhnaf, says that when Muawiyah passed away, Sulaiman bin Surd, one of the luminaries of the people of Kufa, gathered the people and said, Muawiyah's passed away, and I believe we should support Hussein bin Ali, but if you want to support him, write to him. But if you are weak in your view, do not betray him. Sulaiman bin Surd recognized the people he was dealing with. But in understanding how Karbala relates to us, inshallah in later discussions, I'd like to look at specific personalities who switched sides. So one of whom was at this gathering of Sulaiman bin Surd, who switched from being on the side of Imam Hussein to actually becoming an officer in the army of Umar Asad, Azra bin Qais. In fact, he is one of the people who wrote one of the final letters to Imam Hussein in beautiful language, saying, the trees are green, the flowers are in blossom, come to us, we are ready to support you. And then on the 3rd of Muharram, when Umar ibn Asad, the accursed, wants to send an emissary to the army, such a small gathering, the word army is inappropriate, but to the side of Imam Hussein, he picks Azra bin Qais to go to him, to ask him why he came. And Azra bin Qais says, I can't go, because if I ask him why he's here, he'll say, because I wrote to him, I invited him. So these are the characters we're dealing with. But we should not be arrogant when we look at history, because how many of us have been tested like Azra bin Qais? So when we look at the history of the time of Kufa and the mission of Hazrat Muslim who went to them, we should look at ourselves, that if the Imam of our time was to call for us, would we be like Azra bin Qais? Or would we be like Hur, the one who switched from the other side, who was on the side of Umar Asad and then came to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Inshallah, we'll look in more detail later at that.
Inshallah. I'm really sorry to interject at this particular point, but you've raised an important point here, and it brought me to think about the accusation that is often directed to the followers of the Ahlulbayt, that they commemorate this particular period, or they mourn because they are guilty, because they are the ones who are responsible for the killing of Imam Hussein alayhi salam?
Yes, that is a very common one. I have encountered that at university myself. And what is scary is how this is a view that is propagated by the so-called scholars of the Ahlul Sunnah. This principle needs to be challenged. We commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Hussein Islam because we love the Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, we love the Holy Prophet. It is not out of guilt, it is out of grief. I am not a descendant of the people of Kufa. So we are not gathering out of guilt for what was done by Azra bin Qais. We are gathering out of grief, and if we believe what the historians across the board have said, that the Holy Prophet did say, Husaynu minni wa ana min al-Husayn, then the question really is, why aren't all the Muslims grieving at this point? Sure. And when we look at some of these letters, for example, the letter to the people of Basra, which I'd like to look at next, and the letter to the people of Kufa, which we can look at perhaps after the advert break, these are letters where the Imam makes clear that his mission was saving Islam, and these letters are reproduced by Tabari. So clearly saying that this was about the protection of Islam. If that's the case, all Muslims should be grieving the tragedy of Karbala, because all Muslims are the beneficiaries of the saving of Islam. It is not about a small cult of people being guilty. It's about the mass of those who benefit from the light of the Ahlul Bayt grieving about the evil that was perpetrated against that progeny.
Sure. Okay, brilliant. As you mentioned, we're going to break. We've got 2 minutes left, so I don't know if you wanted to continue or...
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, just to briefly summarize the letter to the people of Kufa, the Imam al-Islam makes a couple of important points. Firstly, the person who has been writing to him last, as well as all the other letters, he's saying, look, I'm responding to your letters. And he says, you have said, we have no Imam over us. So he's citing back to them as evidence. Secondly, he talks about the representative he's sending, with the famous terms that I'm sending you, my brother Akhi, my cousin Wabn Ammi, and a trusted one from among my family, وَثِقَةٍ مِّنْ أَهْلِي. So it's the quality of the ambassador that he's sending. And then thirdly, he talks about who an Imam is, that the role of an Imam, he says, by my life, what is the function of the Imam except to act according to the book, uphold justice, profess the truth, and dedicate himself to God. So if we're ever unsure as to what is the role of our Imam today, in this letter to the people of Kufa, Imam Hussein Islam has made clear what is the role of an Imam, any of the 12 Imams, including of course the Imam of our time.
Sure.
So if we have affinity to any of these principles, we should strengthen our affinity to the Imam of our time.
And obviously from the fact that the Imam had to point out or outline what the functions and responsibilities of Imam is, it seems like many of the people of Kufa were looking for a leader in inverted commas.
Yes, and he was making very clear that an Imam is much broader than a political leader. He is one who brings salvation to the souls of the people.
Sure. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. As was mentioned, we're due for a break now. Of course, keep watching. Let's find out what the contents of these letters are and how that can impact on our lives. Inshallah, I'll see you soon. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Ahlulbayt Live on this Saturday afternoon. Just a quick reminder, we'll be here inshallah during the first 10 days of Muharram at between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. every day inshallah with a different guest. Tomorrow your presenter will be Sister Dr. Rebecca Masterton inshallah. Today we are with our honoured guest Ghulam Abbas Laka, who has been setting the scene, if you like, for explaining how we can strengthen our allegiance and relationship to the 12th Imam through the events of Karbala, inshallah. And yes, let's go straight back to the discussion. You were just about to analyze Muslim and his role in this.
Yes, I think as people who want to understand how to deepen our relationship with Imam Mehdi alayhi salam, our Imam of our time in our context, Hazrat Muslim alayhi salam is a great example for us, because he fulfilled his mission when he didn't have access to his Imam. He was far away from his Imam, yet he was serving as an ambassador of his Imam. And I think his approach, therefore, to how he fulfilled his mission is very useful for us, including some of the difficulties that he faced. So earlier we discussed the letter that Imam Hussain sent to the people of Kufa. But I'd like to look at how difficult it is to serve an Imam, especially when he's not there with you. Because history narrates that in the month of Ramadan, in 60 AH, Hazrat Muslim left Makkah to go to Kufa. But of course in those days the desert journeys were treacherous. So he went with 2 guides from the tribe of Qais. But the desert conditions were so bad that they got lost. And because of the extreme thirst, both the guides perished. And Hazrat Muslim single-handedly managed to make it to an oasis, which was called Al-Mandiq. From Al-Mandiq, Hazrat Muslim writes to Imam Hussain to say, look, this is what's happened to me. What would you like me to do? How would you like me to proceed? Do you want to send somebody else to Kufa because what's happened to me? Do you want me to? What would you like? The response of Imam Hussain was a short letter. It was a 1-line letter. But his wording in there is really important, because it shows us many things. Firstly, when you are seeking to fulfill and accomplish the mission given to you by your Imam, and we each have a mission given to us by our Imam, to be ambassadors of Islam, in whatever context that might be, in the school playground, in the workplace, as a mother at home, as a father, it doesn't matter. Whichever context we're in, we're ambassadors of the Imam of our time. Now, when Hazrat Muslim tried to fulfill his ambassadorial responsibility, he couldn't even reach Kufa. He got lost in the desert and he nearly perished with 2 of his guides. So we straight away learn from that do not expect the challenge to be easy.
Sure.
It'll be extremely difficult and it'll be riddled with doubt and fear. And because of that, Imam Hussain writes to him. And this is a letter to each of us, for how do we fulfill our responsibility to our Imam. In this letter, short letter, he begins by warning him about the dangers of fear and doubt. Secondly, he encourages him and strengthens and emboldens him to stick with the mission that he was entrusted with. And thirdly, that inshallah, through the grace of Allah, he will accomplish that mission.
Inshallah.
These 3 points are very important for us when we live in 2014 with the myriad of challenges facing us, from the media challenges at a macro level to the Islamophobia at a micro level we may experience. We become ambassadors of the akhlaq, of the etiquette of the Ahlulbayt alayhimussalam. It's incredibly difficult though.
Of course.
And it is, of course, the hardest part of Islam, which is why the Holy Prophet said in the famous verse, إِنَّمَا بُوِحْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that I have been sent, the core principle of my mission is the perfection of human character. So this is not an easy thing. But remaining steadfast on the path means that when we have our ambitions crushed by circumstances, if we want to serve the Ahlul Bayt and we have great ambitions, and those ambitions are crushed underfoot by our opponents who may put obstacles in our way, and sometimes we may miss a target by just a little bit, and the consequence is that we're far away from where we wanted to be.
Sure.
This letter is a help to us, because this is a letter written to each of us who genuinely want to serve the Imam of our time. The mission is persevere, do not be afraid, stay on course. The course may not be a straight one. The journey to Kufa from Makkah may end up going via Mandek. Far away in the deep desert, risking your life, nearly perishing your life. But that is the course that's for you. Stay on it. And inshallah you will accomplish the mission you've been given. So in our times of darkness, let us remember when Hazrat Muslim was going to Kufa to fulfill his mission and was lost in the desert, and he was given 2 guides by the Imam, and the guides perished. How many times do we face that loneliness of service when there's nobody else around us to support us in the aim that we're seeking to achieve? Indeed, there are powerful forces marshaled against us to crush the ambitions that we may have. In that moment, we may remember that for us to serve Imam Mehdi alayhi salam, we follow the same principle as Hazrat Muslim used to serve Imam Hussain alayhi salam. This one-line letter is for each of us. Next, when we look at, of course, his mission, time doesn't permit us to go into the depths of it. But remember, he went there having seen, as Al-Mukarram says, 12,000 letters of support from the people of Kufa. So he went and was given a great welcome. And how quickly that welcome turned into desolation. Again, we find the same thing. In our efforts, we may initially have a little success to begin with, and then we're at a loss as to how to progress. We need to remain true to the path. Because when Hazrat Muslim al-Islam was battling the forces of Ubaidullah in Kufa, he was alone against all these armies. His Imam wasn't there with him. Our Imam isn't there with us physically, but the spirit of the Imam guided him. And just as much as when he was at the top of the tower of Ubaidullah about to be executed, he sent his final salams to his Imam as having served in the best way that he could. The Imam had never left his side. Because when he sent that final salam, history narrates that Imam Hussain salam turned towards Kufa and said, Alaykum salam ya Muslim. And when the people around him asked him about this strange occurrence, he told them what had happened. He knew. So even though he was ghaib at that time, he wasn't there in Kufa with Hazrat Muslim, he was supporting him. So when we look at our mission, we may not have the Imam next to us, but the spirit of the Imam is there, provided we have the spiritual vision to perceive it. Let us never forget that verse from Surah Baqarah, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ, but you do not perceive. So the lack should never be one of perception. There may be many lacks of resources, of time, of funding, but perception and faith is not a lack of one who truly understands what the mission of Karbala was all about and how it applies to our lives in our times with our resources and our challenges. That is why Hazrat Muslim alayhi salam is a great example for us today.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think this is important from the perspective that I think we must not take our faith for granted. I think that's the lesson I take from what you're saying as well. Not only can we derive lessons from the way in which he carried out his mission, but also, I don't know, I guess on a personal level, a fear of mine sometimes is if and when I'm faced with that task, will I be up for it?
Why is the word I there? It's not about us. It has never been about us. It is about them. It is about the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, we have in Ayatul Kursi, and we teach our children this because it's so powerful. And yet we're accused of seeking shafa, they accuse us those who kill us accuse us of praying to those other than Allah. We don't pray to anyone other than Allah. We pray to Allah. We revere the saints who have given everything, the awliya. Because the Quran says, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعُ إِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. Who is there who can intercede to Allah except with His permission? Therefore it's about the mission. We may be deficient, but as soon as we realize it is not about me, I may be weak, but it is not my strength that is important. It is la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. If we recognize that there is no strength, there is no power except Allah, we are emboldened. The ambition that we may have may be crushed. The mission continues. For us, the objective may simply be to attempt. That may be our role. But as soon as we're able to make the giant leap of recognizing it is not about me, and if I fail, that's okay. Because Hazrat Muslim's attempt to reach Kufa initially was a failure.
Sure.
He couldn't get there. Even his guides died along the way. He ended up in Mandek. But he got there in the end. The mission was fulfilled. We today, 1,000 years later, separated by a millennium of time, by thousands of miles of distance, are talking about his sacrifice. Not just talking about it, are inspired by it. We seek to replicate the mission that he undertook. He was a success. It may have appeared with temporal eyes as a failure. But when we zoom out and look at events from the mark of destiny, through the power of Allah, we can rise above it. Therefore, why does this matter? It matters because when we fail, we must not be crushed by it. We must recognize that to be resolute and resilient is what being an Azadar is all about, is what being a follower of the Ahlulbayt is all about, is what living the mission of Karbala is all about. When we say, Kullu yawmin ashura, kullu ardin Karbala, every day is Ashura, every land is Karbala, this is the struggle. This is what jihad is in the Islamic tradition. The daily struggle to fulfill the values that inspire us. This is why it has never been about us. So it is neither through us nor because of us. And this is why when we fail, we don't need to be too concerned about that. We begin afresh, again, seeking His help again.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so now moving on from Muslim, you still want to talk a bit more about Muslim?
Well, I think it's important now, in the interest of time, with your permission, I'd like to put this whole principle of imamah into the widest context. And this is what Imam Hussain was doing in his letter to the people of Basra. In his letter, he makes clear what the whole mission is about. You spoke, quite rightly, at the outset, about how we need to reflect upon the Holy Prophet, peace upon him. And all the Aimma alayhimussalam, when we reflect about the tragedy of Karbala, Imam Hussain is guiding us precisely to that. So when we look at his letter to the people of Basra, we find a few key points. Firstly, he begins with Nubuwah. He talks about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has selected the Holy Prophet and elevated and honored him, and how he was successful in his mission. And after being successful, then Allah drew him back to himself. Then Imam Hussain continues to talk about the role of the Ahlulbayt. And he describes them, he says, and we have been his family members, his associates, his vicegerents, so those who rightfully follow him in spiritual leadership, his heirs, so those who then say that the Prophet, there are no heirs to the Holy Prophet, and we have the issue of Fadak. The issue of Fadak even is squarely addressed in this letter to the people of Basra. And he continues and says, we have been the most rightful of people to attain his post, that of leadership of the people after him. But he continues, so that's Nubuwah, prophethood. Then he goes on to the different types of imamah. He says, however, some people usurped this right from us. And by the way, this letter is in extant sources from various well-known scholars, such as Tabari. I am citing from the Tarikh of Tabari, and in the section titled The Events of the Year 61 AH. There you will find this letter in Tabari. And he continues, however, some people have usurped this right from us. So saying, hey, look, what happened was unjust. Secondly, saying, but we gave consent for we disliked division. So when we are told, when people try and misrepresent the history of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, he's addressing this. But we gave consent for we disliked division and favored public welfare. Recognizing that actually there is a greater good that they sacrificed for, which is what they always did. That is what Karbala is about. This great shrine that we have was erected by those who love him and who benefited from his sacrifice. But he continues, and we know that we are indeed more deserving over this right than those who have gained it. I have already dispatched my envoy to you with this letter and invite you to the book of Allah and the Prophet's way, the Sunnah. For the Sunnah has diminished and heresy has been restored. So now he's saying, this is why I'm standing. Hence, if you listen to me, I shall direct you to the path of success. And may the peace of Allah and mercy and the grace of Allah be with you all. A number of important points. Firstly, his mission was one of peace and unity, not of division. So we should strive for the same thing. We mustn't be accused of being sectarian, because if we truly follow the mission of Muhammad, his was a mission of unity. But unity does not mean uniformity. Unity does not mean that everybody has to be the same. A family is unified, but they're not uniform. The mother and the father are very different. One is male, one is female. The children are very different. Indeed, if there had been uniform, if they'd all been the same, there would not have been a family, there would not have been any children. So, unity has never required uniformity. Let us not today be told that if we want to unify with our other brothers, and indeed the wider brothers in creation, that we need to give up our values. No, that's not what unity is. Unity is about respecting ourselves and respecting the others together. That's unity. What we are being sold wrongly is uniformity. And our young people need to be warned and guided against this, so that we do not throw away our heritage in the name of unity, when really what we are buying is uniformity. We are being grossly shortchanged in that regard.
Agree to disagree.
Yes, and respectfully live in peace, standing by the values that we have. But what is important here is what happened when this letter went. Because whilst this letter was very powerful in a number of ways, firstly, it talked about the importance of the role of the Ahlulbayt in the context of Nubuwwat, that the two go together. So you cannot believe in the Holy Prophet and then forget about the Ahlulbayt and try and delete them from history. That won't do. Secondly, he talks about the wisdom of the approach of the Aimma to take a different approach in different times, depending on what was best for the community. That's been the overriding consideration at all times. But when we look at what happened, it's quite interesting. Because according to Tabari's Tariq, this is not, God forbid, sheer propaganda or anything like that. This is in the wider sources of history. That this letter was sent by Imam Hussein alayhi salam by his trusted emissary called Suleiman bin Razin. And this was a letter that went to some of the great noblemen of Basra, the heads of the tribes. So, for example, Malik bin I think my notes say Musma al-Bakri, Masood bin Amr, al-Mundhir bin Jarud, and others. But the key point is, these people tried to hide this letter that had come from Imam Hussein from Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, because he was the governor of Basra, and this is why this letter is important. But Mundhir bin al-Jarud al-Abdi was the father-in-law of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Now, even though when the letter came, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad had already been given the governorship of Kufa. He had been given his new post. He only apparently had about 2 days left before he left Basra. Nevertheless, one of the things he did in the last 2 days, when he got this letter from his father-in-law, from Imam Hussain, he ordered the execution of the messenger of Imam Hussain, Sulaiman bin Razin. We salute this man, because it shows the sacrifices made by even the emissaries of the mission of the Ahlulbayt. And in a cruel, ironic twist of history, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad ordered one of his executioners, who was also called Sulaiman bin Auf, to behead Sulaiman bin Razin, the emissary of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. This shows us a lot. That's why this letter to the people of Basra is so important to us in the time of the Mahdi alayhi salam, for a number of reasons. Firstly, it puts the context of imamah into the widest possible sense as being linked to the continuation of the message of Nubuwah. That was the first part of the letter to the Basrans. Secondly, how an imam stands up for the truth. And this is what imamah is. This is why in Surah Bani Israel, verse 81, it is narrated by the scholars of tafsir, of exegesis, that when the 12th Imam reappears, his first verse will be, وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقِّ, and say truth has come, وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ, and falsehood has been vanquished, إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوكَ, that surely falsehood is but a thing to be vanquished. So that this letter to the people of Basra says this is what imamah is. But even the emissaries of this message of truth will be slaughtered. And the riwayat, the accounts tell us that when the Mahdi al-Islam will reappear, he will have to fight the people of Makkah, because they will be so strongly against the Ahlul Bayt. We can see where the roots of this have been laid. And we are told that when he will conquer Makkah, the governor of Makkah that he will appoint will be slaughtered shortly after he leaves Makkah to spread the message of truth elsewhere. We have echoes of Sulaiman bin Razin's assassination at the hands of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad before he went to Kufa to then order the assassination of Hazrat Muslim bin Aqil. These are people who are exceptional, not just for the strength of character they possessed at the time, but the myriad of lessons they provide for us today. So just to summarize very briefly. Firstly, loyalty under fire. So when we are facing obstacles in the fruition of our mission, we must not be crestfallen. We must continue and strive. Even if the guide who was supposed to take us there dies along the way and we're in the deserts, like Muslim bin Aqil was, we continue. Secondly, tawakkul. That trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the widest possible good. Even though our particular ambitions may be crushed, the mission continues. Thirdly, we remain resolute to the values of the Ahlul Bayt and of Karbala, which is the mission of unity. The letter to the people of Basra says, we do not like divisiveness and division. This was a sacrifice for peace, for compassion. So we as the Azadars, if we seek to be Azadars, need to be among the first to stand up for unity among all people and for compassion to all. Including if we see evil and tyranny in our own families. It begins at home. Standing up for the truth begins now. Especially if we are among the tyrants. We say in various teachings that I am among the tyrants. You know, we confess to being part of the tyrants. So we should warn ourselves and warn the people around us and stand up for truth. That should be the mark of an ambassador of Imam Mehdi alayhi salam, who has heeded the lesson of Hazrat Muslim alayhi salam, the ambassador of Imam Hussain alayhi salam.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed. And I think yeah, that's a beautiful way to round up the lessons that we've learnt today. And I think, again, on a personal level, what I take from this is no matter what seems to be happening to us on an individual basis, is to always have that kind of panoramic picture, you know, that macro picture of the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Inshallah, as I mentioned, Ghulam Abbas Laka will be back over the course of the next few days to continue giving us some pointers as to how we can strengthen our relationship to the 12th Imam, inshallah, through the event of Karbala. Thank you very much for watching. Sister Rebecca, Dr. Rebecca Masterton will be here tomorrow at 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. inshallah. We'll see you again soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
يا حسين